In the previous lecture, we've discussed the composition of the Crusader society, its political powers, its military power. Now I'd like to continue with the events that took place in the 12th century that eventually led to the demise, to the fall of the Crusader kingdom in 1187. By 1127, we witnessed the rise of a Muslim leader in the region of Iraq and Syria today. His name was Zengi, or Zenki, or Zengi. We don't even know how to pronounce his name properly. But anyhow, whatever his precise name was, he was a great leader of the Muslims, and he managed to actually occupy Syria and Iraq, except for one city, which stood alone, and this is Damascus. The question is, why couldn't he get over the Damascus resistance? What was the problem with Damascus? And the answer is quite simple. The inhabitants of Damascus were Muslims, but they were independent, or at least autonomous, for so long that the last thing they wanted is to become part of the empire of their brother Zengi, who's also a Muslim. They preferred to cooperate with the Christians, that is with the Crusaders, and sign a pact with them as long as it means that they keep their independence. So Damascus was backed by the Crusaders, and Zengi couldn't break this wall that stood before him. So, failing to defeat Damascus, Zengi turns his efforts in a new direction. He looks up north, and in the north, in southern Turkey today, there's a place called Edessa, Urfa. So he attacks Edessa, and in 1144, he manages to gain control over the city. That was a great shock to the Crusaders and to Europe. For the first time, the Crusaders, who managed to gain control over the Holy Land and other places too, lose territory to the Muslims. A city which was established during the First Crusade and stood for decades now was lost to the Christians. So by 1146, a second crusade is organized in Europe by Conrad III, the German, and Louis VII of France, whose wife, by the way, is Eleanor of Aquitaine. The goal of the Second Crusade is not the Holy Land. Mind you, nothing happened in the Holy Land. It's just Edessa that was lost. So they focused their efforts on Edessa. But they failed to take over Edessa, and therefore they look around looking for an easy task, an easy place to take over, and immediately they identify Damascus as a weak point in the Muslim world. But wait a second, you say, Damascus? Damascus is an ally of the Crusaders. Well, yes, it is. But when you need to show some political achievements, you forget everything else. So the Christians now attack Damascus in an attempt to gain something from the Second Crusade. To no avail. They failed to conquer Damascus. Damascus was now weakened by the Crusaders. Damascus is now isolated. The Crusaders are obviously no longer its friends. And when Zengi dies and his son Nur ad-Din takes over, Nur ad-Din decides to concentrate his efforts on this solitary post of Damascus. And obviously, standing alone, Damascus stands no chance. Damascus is taken by Nur ad-Din in 1154. So the only achievement of the Second Crusade was actually to enforce the Muslim powers north of the Crusader kingdom, instead of gaining the territories taken from the Crusaders. Encouraged by his success, Nur ad-Din decides that his next target is Jerusalem. He wishes to put an end to the Crusader entity in the Middle East. But he's not powerful enough. he notices that the Crusaders are motivated by religious sentiments. They fight for Jerusalem because Jerusalem is important to them from a religious perspective. They fight over Jerusalem because Jerusalem for these Crusaders now is their home. They were born here. This is a new generation. How can Nur ad-Din persuade the Muslims about the importance of gaining control over Jerusalem? He does that by sending messengers, qadis, judges, speakers, and all over his country, all over his empire, and they basically spread the significance of Jerusalem when they teach the Muslims about the importance of the city in Islam. When they do that, they use books that were written for that purpose, and they're called Fada'il al-Quds, literally meaning in Arabic, the praise of Jerusalem. Books that tell Muslims who don't know why Jerusalem is important, that they should fight for this city. So there are parables and stories about the importance of Jerusalem. And this is not enough. In order to show the Muslims that he's extremely serious about Jerusalem, Nur ad-Din dedicates a minbar. Minbar is a preacher's stand made of wood. You find it in many great mosques. So he orders a beautiful minbar to be made in Damascus and dedicated to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Once we conquer Jerusalem, he says, I will bring it personally to the city, to the holy city. But Nur ad-Din isn't successful. Yes, he campaigns against the Crusaders. He occupies Egypt, south of the Crusader kingdom, but he's unable to defeat the Crusaders. In 1174, Nur ad-Din died, and he was replaced by a very successful general of his, whose name was Salah ad-Din. Salah ad-Din, the new leader of the Muslim world now in this region, that is, who controls Egypt and Syria. That was his heritage left by Nur ad-Din. Salah ad-Din begins in 1174 a series of wars with the Crusaders until 1187. During these wars, Salah ad-Din invades the country several times. He goes to the Galilee, to Lebanon in the north, the Jezreel Valley, the region of Gezer in the Shfela, the lower plain of the country, and he makes several attempts to take over the country. But he is unsuccessful. In between battles, in between invasions, surprisingly enough, there are actually peaceful times. For instance, let me give you an example to that. In 1178, it's time of peace between the Crusaders and Saladin. They signed an agreement for a ceasefire for quite a long time. The Crusaders have all the intentions of keeping that agreement, so does Saladin. But now comes the Knight Templars. Remember, the Knight Templars are the most powerful Crusader order in the entire country, in the entire kingdom. And the Knight Templars decide to build a fortress on the Jordan River. This fortress is known as Chastelet, the Little Fortress. And it was built in 1178. When the Muslims noticed that, immediately they sent a messenger to the king at the time, Baldwin IV, and demanded him to stop the building of the new fortress. This is in violation of the agreement, they said. And they were right. Baldwin said, listen, I can't stop the Knight Templars. Now that sheds a beautiful light on the complex relations between the Crusader king and the powers he's in control of. Technically, he is the king of the Knight Templars too, but the Knight Templars actually do whatever they want. They are so powerful, even the king cannot stop them. Even though he would have liked to do that, he can't. So Saladin says, listen up, I'll give you a huge amount of money, bribe them, give it to them, as long as you just stop what you do. Baldwin says, I'm sorry, I can't do anything. They won't listen to me. He increases the amount of money, Salah ad-Din, to no avail. The Crusaders keep on building Chastelet. And Saladin eventually has no choice other than attacking Chastelet and actually destroying it several months after its completion. So this is a shining example of the complex relations. It's not simply Muslims against Crusaders, as we've seen in the case of Damascus. It's a mixture of different interests, of different powers, each playing his own role in the Middle East. If you ever thought that the Middle East is complex today, think twice. You see, it was even more complex perhaps in the medieval times. Saladin waits for the opportunity to launch the final attack against the Crusaders. And that happens in the 1180s. During the middle of the 1180s, around the year 1186, we witness an attack launched by a local nobleman, a local Crusader nobleman, whose name is Renaud de Chatillon. He was of French origins, of course, judging by his name. Renaud de Chatillon decides to invade the holy city of Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula. This is the most important city for the Muslims. Mecca is the first, Medina is the second, Jerusalem is only the third. And Renaud de Chatillon, in this complex and sensitive situation, when the two powers are standing against each other, he decides to attack no less than Mecca. Obviously, he was defeated, but he continued on attacking the Muslims. In one case, he attacked a caravan of Hajj pilgrims. Hajj is the festival of going to Mecca. Pilgrims go to Mecca every year on that month. He attacks a caravan, and in this caravan, according to legend, maybe it's incorrect, but according to legend, the sister of Saladin was in that caravan. So obviously Saladin was personally offended by that, and he vowed that he will put an end to the Crusader control in the Holy Land. By 1187, the events culminate, and it will eventually end up in the final battle at the Horns of Chitin. On that year, in May, June 1187, Saladin invades the Holy Land. He comes from Egypt, leading a huge army of tens of thousands of warriors. Remember, the Crusaders' army is about 1/10 of that, perhaps 1,200 knights, a couple of thousands of foot soldiers, way smaller than that. And Saladin besieges Tiberias with his huge army. The Crusaders immediately respond by gathering their forces near the springs of Tzipori in the north. This is a traditional gathering place of the Crusader armies. And then the Crusaders now begin to debate over what exactly should we do? How should we respond to the invasion of Saladin? The king, Guy de Lusignan, says, let us attack now. But the head of the opposition to the king, whose name is Raymond of Tripoli, he is the king's foe, he's the enemy of the king actually, but now they cooperate. He says, no, I suggest that we sit down and do nothing. Just wait. It's July already. Saladin has a huge army. Think about the logistics of taking care of such an army, bringing water, food. People complain. They will be broken into pieces shortly. Let them do whatever they want, conquer whatever they want. Eventually they will be broken and they will retreat. And indeed, Raymond's advice was accepted. But on the night of June the 3rd, things rapidly change. The decision to accept Raymond's advice and stay put is now turned over, and King Guy de Lusignan orders his soldiers to attack the Muslims. Let's move now from Tsipori down to Tiberias. And they start marching during that night. The Muslims are waiting for them. The Muslims are burning the fields around the Crusaders, shooting arrows at them with the light cavalry around. The Crusaders can do nothing. They're suffocating in the heavy armor. They can't breathe because of the smoke of the burning fields. And the Muslims are attacking them, as I said, constantly with arrows. At the morning of July 4th, the Crusader army approaches the Horns of Chittim. The Horns of Chittim is a volcano, a dormant volcano, on the way to Tiberias. And on the way, they are ambushed and attacked by the army of Saladin. Most of the Crusader army was destroyed. But more than that, when the Crusaders went into battle, they brought with them from Jerusalem the Holy Cross, the relic from the crucifixion of Jesus, which was presented in the church in Jerusalem. The cross was lost also on that day, on July 4th. July 4th is the date when the kingdom of the Crusaders suddenly ceased to exist. Jerusalem was later besieged and a couple of months later surrendered before the troops of Saladin, and the first Crusader kingdom was basically done. Everything was over. It seemed that there's no chance for a revival. But as the years will prove, things turned out quite differently.